A narcissist gets their vital life force energy, their chi, their prana from others. They aren't self-sourced. So they learn to put out energetic feelers into other people's energy fields and draw on the energy. People who are self-resourced, on the other hand, have their own energetic supply. They're connected to themselves. They can spend time in nature, meditate, or do something they love and feel energized enough by that. When we learn to spot red flags and patterns from people who aren't able to self-source their own energy, it preserves our own energetic life force, because we're no longer these kind of nebulous blobs that have all these leaks and holes in our field that they can plug into. So when we know the patterns, we can be like, oh, I see that, and sort of push it out and be like, I'm going to relate to you, but with a boundary, or with this kind of electric fence of my own power that's protecting me. So you're there and I'm here. When we don't have these tools, there becomes right here, sucking our energy and meshing with our energy. And that's when we get drained, we get depleted, we lose our sense of self. So gaslighting is one tactic that narcissists use to drain your energy. And the narcissist will make the individual they're in a relationship with doubt their reality, their own thoughts, their feelings, and eventually their sanity and judgment, as a way to gain control over somebody and to really make them doubt their sense of self. Again, when our sense of self is not strong, it allows people to plug into us and drain us and allow them to create a false reality, which is what gaslighting is. When a narcissist starts off a relationship with us, they don't right out of the gate have all these behaviors. It's a slow progression over time, done in a way that one day we're like, I have no idea what happened. I don't know how I ended up in the situation of complete depletion, of complete powerlessness, and I have no way of getting out. So when we learn the stages and the signs and the patterns and the flags, we never get to that point. We start seeing them along the way and making a different choice. So along the stages, one of the first ones is called love bombing. And it's when they try to really become this sort of Prince Charming character, get into your good graces. They try to win you over with their charm, with their looks, with their ability to take you on fancy dates, or their kind of projection of themselves as these big people in the world, powerful people, likable people. They also put you on an unrealistic pedestal that eventually you will fall off of because it's unrealistic. They might say things like, you're the one, you're my twin flame, you're my dream girl. So those are inherently things that you say to somebody that are like, again, dream, like unrealistic. And when people don't live up to that dream, the next stage is the devaluation and the discard. So the devaluation is the criticizing of who you are based on their observation and their knowledge of your core identity, your values. If they succeed in energetically weakening you enough, you might lose your sense of self and become addicted to the high of when they are loving and nice and kind, waiting for those breadcrumbs of attention, of affection that felt so good in the beginning. The narcissist is a deeply wounded, traumatized person that's acting these behaviors out of that place. So often you might have heard of like the empath narcissist dynamic, which is when somebody who's highly sensitive, highly empathetic gets hooked in with a narcissist. And they get really burned by these relationships because of their nature of seeing a deeply wounded person and wanting to help them and empathizing with them and saying, oh, they only said this or did this because they had a tough childhood, or they're this or that. You know, we're really abandoning ourselves with our empathy and giving it to somebody else in a way that's really dishonoring of ourselves. We do this to the detriment of our own boundaries. The trauma and wounding of the narcissist should not be used to weaponize your own empathy against yourself. You don't violate your own boundaries and pretend that things are okay. And that's just you being compassionate to their pain. But what about your pain? What about your sense of self? This just means you're not in a healthy relationship to yourself if you're dishonoring yourself to give away your power away to somebody else. Ultimately, the only relationship worth fighting for is the relationship you have to yourself. So, different types of gaslighting. One is denying reality. So let's say they said, you were being a bitch last night. But when you want to talk about setting a boundary about the name calling, they might say, I didn't call you a bitch. I said you were being bitchy. It's dismissing the issue, the reality of your experience, and also of your request for a boundary. All of that's just left on the table without being addressed. And it's also wrong-making for them to not take accountability for what they did, but to put it on you and say, you got it wrong. I didn't say that. I said this. Ultimately, they're very similar. And they need to be addressed if it's a concern in the relationship. The other kind of gaslighting is called blame shifting. It's when, kind of similar to the previous example, they don't take accountability. They shift the blame onto you. So their wrongness isn't even part of the conversation. So they might say, I wouldn't have ever done that or called you that if you didn't do this. I wouldn't have called you bitchy if you weren't being a bitch. And you should really give me an apology for your behavior. It's important to note that categorizing people into right and wrong is not going to create a healthy dynamic. Ultimately, it takes two to tango. If there's been a conflict, both people really need to look at what they contributed to it. So in the case of the discussion I just mentioned, where somebody was calling somebody else a name, that person needs to be like, okay, your behavior was problematic to me for these reasons. And yes, I called you this name and I can take ownership of that. This isn't the kind of relationship you want to be in where you're called names. And I can also take ownership for the fact that I got really reactive and upset and let this hurtful, harmful word out of my mouth towards you that really derailed the conversation and took us away from love. So you can see how both people can take a bit of ownership here. It takes two to tango. And this isn't true for every single argument or conflict, but it's true for the vast majority of them. So really watch for the pattern of somebody always putting the blame on you. Always. If it's sometimes equal or even like 60-40, that's reasonable. But if it's 99 or 100%, that's when you know this person is potentially having narcissistic traits where they're unable to see their own shadow. They're constantly blame shifting, gaslighting me. The next form of gaslighting we'll talk about is called projection. It's when you project your own identity onto somebody else instead of owning your identity. So somebody who's really got a healthy level of self-awareness and knows exactly who they are kind of owns their shadow. They'll go inwards and reflect, and then maybe go to their partner and say like, hey, I'm noticing this and I want to own it and I want to change and I want to have a better relationship. Somebody who's projecting will be so unable to see their own self that they'll look at the closest object to them, which is their partner, and go, it's you, you're doing it. So due to their own lack of self-awareness, inability to self-reflect, and the high tendency to project, many narcissists don't even know they're narcissistic, and instead they'll project the traits onto somebody else. So if you meet somebody who says like, all these people are narcissistic in my reality, in my past, and then they start accusing you of narcissistic traits, it can be really confusing and frustrating, but just notice the pattern. The pattern is all these other people who've been the problem. One question you can ask is, what was your role in the relationship? What would you have done differently? Right? So like that is a flag, but then the way that you can address the flag is inquiry and being a little curious and saying, are you a person who's able to own their shadow, who's able to own their own role in a failed relationship? Or is everything always about other people? oh, my ex was crazy, they were psycho. That's a flag for me, especially if it's multiple exes. So what you can do in the situation, if you're in it, is to stay really calm and don't feed into their projection. Again, if we think of this in terms of energetics, this is somebody who is trying to get a rise out of you. They're dysregulated and they want you to match their dysregulation. And then they start feeding off this energy of this, like, oh, what are you doing? Oh my God, I'm so upset. And you're like this, and they're just like absorbing all of this energy from you. If you are solid in yourself, in your sense of identity, and you're like, that doesn't sound right to me, or I know I'm not that, or maybe I can see some of that, but that's not who I am. And also, do you see your part in this at all? Then they kind of don't have anything to absorb. They will either kind of move away from you and go try to find someone else they can target, or they might just keep trying, in which case, you know, it's your time to leave the relationship. The next form of gaslighting we'll talk about is minimizing. And this can happen when somebody is kind of denying your reality in terms of how important or big or even what happened. So if you say, hey, I didn't like it when you said this thing to me in public and it kind of embarrassed me in front of everybody, the person might say, you care about too much what other people think. You're too sensitive. And without accepting the reality of what happened and what they did, or they might even say, I never said that. I don't remember saying that. I said this instead, or I didn't say anything at all. You're making this up. I don't know where you got this from. I would never say that. Minimizing. Yeah, denying your reality. That's gaslighting. And it's really harmful. And it feels so painful when it comes from somebody that we're in a relationship with, because we trust them and we love them and we expect a level of respect and trust and love back. And so all these behaviors are so confusing because we get sometimes this affection, this kindness, this care. And at the other side of it, we get this minimization, this projection, this denial of reality, which ultimately makes us feel like we're not real people, we're not important, we're not relevant, our realities don't matter. And we get smaller and smaller and smaller. And that's kind of what they want, because then they have the power and the superiority. And again, the energy dynamics is like closed, collapse, small, big, grandiose, powerful. It's really important to recognize when this might be happening to us, because as we get more and more diminished and confused and disoriented through the gaslighting, we really lose our sense of self. We lose our intuition. We lose our sense of self-knowing. And it's not just within the relationship, it's insidious. It starts to impact the rest of our lives. So our intuition is so important because it gives us a signal from our bodies. What is right for me? What's wrong for me? What are my needs, even outside the relationship? If we don't have that sense of relationship with ourselves to honor our needs and recognize what's right, what's wrong, our needs don't matter. It's all about this person and their projection and what they want to have in the relationship and who you are in the relationship. You're not actually a real person in the sense that you have desires, needs, wants, feelings that are impacted in a very profound and relevant way. So when we lose touch with our sense of identity, with our intuition, we lose sense with what we actually need, what our body is telling us that we need. What's right for us, what's wrong for us. This can even be like what job is right for us and wrong for us, what friends are right or wrong for us, what foods are. We lose complete touch with ourselves. And that's the real danger of these relationships and of these dynamics. And that's why it's so important to learn when it's happening and learn how to get out of it and learn how to come back to the sense of wholeness. Rebuild your energetic wholeness, your sense of boundaries, your value, your sense of self. So I've been in these kind of relationships where over years this has happened, where it sounds so good in the beginning and it seems like dreamlike. This person seems so good on paper. And then slowly the diminishment happens and the gaslighting happens and the abuse happens. And it goes further and further. And it gets harder and harder to get out of it the further and further it goes. And there's a lot more to say on this, but my ultimate message is that you can get out of it. You can stop these patterns. You can get out of these relationships. You can heal. There is more healthy love available for you on the other side of it. All we need to do is become conscious of the tactics, the flags, the patterns to watch out for, and start having the strength to know when it's time to say goodbye to somebody, when it's time to end a relationship that's not healthy. Because the more that we start saying no to the relationships that aren't for us, the more opportunities there are for the new relationships that are meant for us, that are healthy, that are full of love and care and true honor and respect are on the other side of that.